Hello and welcome to everyone joining our session today. This is Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace, powered by Diversify and Herspace. And today's session is called Cross-Cultural Communication. My name is Astrid Sundberg. I'm your moderator for today. I'm a director, a board advisor, speaker, and leader from the startup and scale-up climate, with a particular passion for social sustainability and impact-driven work. I've previously held the role of Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Norway's first unicorn company, Udeze, and I now work as Director of Impact Partnerships at the Conduit in Oslo, a newly established membership community for people who are interested in scaling solutions to sustainability challenges. I'm a long-term supporter of the Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace series, which we're bringing you today. I think it's been going on for about 4 years now, delivering more than 40 different thematic webinars on some extremely thought-provoking sessions and captivating topics, dilemmas, with some absolutely phenomenal speakers. I've been on both sides of the table as a speaker, today as a moderator for the first time, actually. And these sessions are always jam-packed with enormously useful guidelines, an abundance of aha moments, and there's always some inspirational epiphanies along the way. I've utilised the material from these sessions as a back catalogue of learning to tackle challenging topics as a leader. And I'm really, really grateful to be moderating this session today as we bring you the 3 C's, cross-cultural communication. So I'm tuning in from my home office today. I have a white wall behind me which has been blurred, and I'm wearing a sort of pink jacket, which just on the picture it looks very kind of shoulder pad power jacket, but I think that's on the screen. It didn't look that power jacket when I put it on this morning. It's pink. My shirt's pink. I'm a white European woman wearing some kind of gold-rimmed glasses. And I just want to share my visual description for anyone who might be tuning into the session today or tuning into the session later with visual impairments. So next, I'd like to say a very heartfelt welcome to today's panelists. And I would also like to ask each of you to give a very short introduction with a self-describer. This is the practice of describing yourself and your surroundings for the benefit of anyone here today or anyone watching the session on playback with visual impairments. So firstly, I am going to come to you, Eva, as you're first on my screen. Hello, Eva, and welcome.
Hi, Astrid. Thank you so much. And happy to be here. Welcome to everyone who is part of the Zoom session, everyone on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Eva. I am from Croatia and have been living in Norway for the past 8.5 years. I work at Diversify with Chisom. I'm director at Diversify, and I've been at Diversify for the past 5 years. I'm also a white European woman with very light brown hair. My background is blurred, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck sweater. And glasses. I always realized I forgot to say I'm wearing glasses.
Thanks, Eva. Lovely glasses they are too, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay, next on my screen, Shahrzad, I'm going to come to you, please, for your intro. Hello and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Astrid. And very nice to meet you all. Super happy to be here. My name is Shahrzad. I am a Persian woman with semi-long dark hair. I'm wearing red lipstick today, and I'm also wearing a red turtleneck because it's still super cold in Belgium. Spring has not arrived here yet, unfortunately. I am also dialing in from my home office in Brussels. I was born in Tehran, Iran, raised in Belgium, and I lived in over 8 countries. I speak over 5 languages, and I'm learning more right now. And that's one of the reasons also I'm super happy to be in this call because the topic is really close to my heart. I work for Expedia Group, and I'm trying to show a little bit more here. I've been working with Expedia Group for over 8 years. I worked for a while in the inclusion and diversity team, And today I'm serving as the VP for EMEA for our Asian community, or the Asian ERG. I also give guest lectures around IND at different universities across Belgium and hopefully more. And I'm very much excited to have this conversation with all of you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Shahrzad. Really warm welcome to you for this session, and super looking forward to digging in and hearing some of your insights. Chisom, I'd like to come to you next for your intro, please.
Thanks, Astrid. Hi, everyone. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am an economist and also the founder of Diversify. I have been losing my voice for a week, so hopefully it carries me through today. But really happy to be here and to discuss with Eva and Shahrzad and with Astrid as the moderator for the first time ever. So really looking forward to this. To describe my background and myself, I am a Black woman, brown skin. I have long braids put in a bun. Today I try to add some color. If you've been following us, you know that I'm usually in some like Black or white outfits. So today I thought, why not a colorful scarf? So my scarf has, oh gosh, so many different colors. Green, orange, white. Okay, and flower prints. I am wearing big bluish earrings that's made by artists, I think, from South America. My background is blurred out, but you might see the makings of a round clock. Yeah, happy to be here.
Great, thank you, Chisom. And if you're all ready, I think I am going to dive in with the first question. And my first question goes to all of you, and this is a great place to start the question today. What is cross-cultural communication, and what does it mean to each one of you? Shahrzad, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you. So it has different meanings in my eyes. I think the first one is really about being curious, to learn about different cultures, to learn about different communication styles, to learn about different languages. It's about exchanging ideas, knowledge, learnings that you've acquired in one culture and you're very open to share with another culture, and about understanding and navigating differences in communication styles, differences in behaviors. But also, I think what's a very important one is to be very conscious that we all have different cultural communication styles, and to be aware when you're talking or when you're speaking in a verbal, nonverbal, digit, like over Zoom or in an email, or just speaking to someone who is not from your background. So that piece of consciousness is very, very important.
Yeah, that was a really great overview. Thank you so much. Chisom, I'm going to come to you next to see if you can add something to what Shahrzad's just said as a sort of overview, intro, nuance of the topic for today.
Yes. So with cross-cultural communication, really just in addition to what Shahrzad said, I think it has a lot to do with who we are as people and all we bring with us. So our identities, our cultures, our mannerisms, our norms, our values, and how we bring that to whatever spaces we occupy, and how we engage with other people who also have their own norms, their own values, their own identities, and how we make that work. From, of course, a lot of conversation today centered around, how do we create inclusive spaces for people? How do we respect different cultures? How do we respect people and their different mannerisms? So looking at everything from like how we communicate, body language, verbally, even visually, and in other ways the communication takes place. So for me, just trying to see, when I reflect on it, it's thinking about all the different ways in which we show up as ourselves and how we are able to engage with people who also show up as themselves. Just, yeah.
Great. Really thorough, really interesting answers and context there, Chisom. And Eva, could you add to that, please, with your interpretation of what cross-cultural communication is and what it means to you?
Of course. So Shahrzad and Chisom said most of the things. What I would like to add is, for me, communication in general is a way to create and forge connections with people. So cross-cultural communication is, to me, very important when we try to bridge across our differences and create those true connections. And when I see true connections, I don't mean that we're all best friends and we never disagree. By true connection, I mean that we see each other. Like, I see you, I see our differences, I see our similarities, and I celebrate them. And of course, I would also say that effective cross-cultural communication requires empathy and patience and flexibility and willingness to learn and adjust to different cultural communication styles and everything that Shahrzad and Chisom mentioned.
That's brilliant, Eva. You brought up a number of things in that answer that I'm sure we're going to take a deeper dive on today. The next question I have is, again, something I'd like to go to all of you. And this is really about the barriers in cross-cultural communication. I think that's why a lot of people might have joined today, because this is where the discussion gets really interesting. So what are some of the common barriers to effective cross-cultural communication? And just as a follow-up to that, how can they be overcome? And Chisom, I'm going to come to you first, if I may.
Thanks, Astrid. So the question is barriers and how we can overcome them. Maybe I can merge that in how I reflect on this. So I think oftentimes the barriers to engaging is thinking that we're the norm. For me, that always comes up as the first problem. Is we expect people to engage as we do. We expect people to show up in the world as we do. And then when they don't, these expectations that we have of them without their consent becomes a problem when they don't meet it. So in thinking of we are not the norm, the way we engage is valid, but that doesn't mean other people have to engage the same way. So if you think about being professional, so we're talking about the workplace, right? A lot of us have different ideas of what it is to be professional. Oftentimes being professional has been predefined by Western standards. So when you have people who come from other backgrounds for whom professionalism means something else, how does that merge? But even within the West, right, there are different ways to show up professionally. There are some spaces where I couldn't potentially show up with my child. But for me, my child and me come together because, hey, I have a kid. And when I have to show up in professional spaces, I have to show up with my kid because I don't have family lying around to help me. So it's also just recognizing that for a lot of us, even some things that we really, really believe is the absolute norm. One example I like to give here is when you go to somebody's house, you eat something delicious, and they burp at the table, right? A lot of us might be mortified. We might think, oh my gosh, how dare you burp, so rude. And in other cultures, not burping is considered incredibly rude, right? So it's recognizing that really we're not the norm and then thinking we don't know what we don't know. There is something quite beautiful about recognizing that we don't know everything. And that's okay. And then leading with curiosity. I think oftentimes we make assumptions without asking questions. There's so many conflicts that begin with wrong assumptions we have of people, of situations. And rather than saying, hey, Shahrzad, this is what I'm receiving from this. Is this what you mean? Or is this what happened? You know, I go, oh my gosh, how dare you do that? oh my gosh, so ridiculous. And then that automatically meets Shahrzad at a position where she's just like, I'm not going to deal with that, right? So we see that this happens as well. And of course, active listening. So instead of making assumptions where we think we heard something, how about we practice active listening? Eva, is this what you said? And lastly, and I know Shahrzad and Eva have a lot to add, something that really comes up for me is listening to understand, not to respond. Oftentimes in communication, we misjudge people based not only on what we hear them say, but also how their body language, how they show up in terms of body language. But we don't consider that people show up differently. Like, so not everybody will look you in the eyes dead straight and shake your hand very strongly the way we prefer. So how do we also engage? How do we actually listen, not just to what is being said, but all the other stimuli that we were receiving? I'll stop there.
Thanks, Chisom. Thanks so much for the stress here on active listening and this idea of remembering to come from a point of not always thinking with a norm. And Shahrzad, have you got anything to add to that, please?
Definitely. First of all, I think Chisom, you mentioned very, very important points. I think what we really need to be aware of is, once again, the whole piece. I think you phrase it very nicely. We don't know what we don't know. There's so many things, and I feel the more I learn, the more I travel, the less I feel like I do know things, and the less I feel like I have seen the world. And I think like this matches a little bit what you were saying. There's a lot of things that that are part of certain customs or certain traditions that we're not aware of, and that's okay. But it's about that, having that communication, speaking around it, and learning. So for me, for example, when we talk about overcoming certain barriers, like when we're talking really about language, for example, I think what's really important is that when you're in a meeting and okay, you're five people from completely different places, the meeting is going to be hosted in English, but actually there's only one person who's native, or other way around, there's only one person who's not native. Then, as the people who are native in that meeting, you have to be very conscious to simplify the language that you're using. So the whole consciousness piece for me is extremely important, because if you're not going to simplify, so if you're that one person who's in a meeting who's not native, you will feel as a minority, and you will not be very comfortable to say, hey, would you mind using more simple terms? So this is a little bit also on those that are native, let's say. So I think that's one piece. On the other side, there's also, of course, a lot of nonverbal communication. There are lots of gestures, there are facial expressions, there are body language that plays like such a big role in how we communicate. And that's very important to be aware. So if we travel to a certain country, or if we manage a team that is from different backgrounds, or neighbors, we live in a global society right now. We have a lot of people around us that are coming from different backgrounds. It's important to be aware of what is okay and what is not okay. I think especially when you travel, and this has really opened my eyes. For example, these are a couple of things that I learned when I was living in Singapore. But for example, placing your chopsticks in a wrong way can be seen very, very rude. Or showing the soles of your feet when you're, let's say, I mean, as a woman, we don't often do that, but I think as a man, very often when they cross their legs, like, the person next to them can see the sole of their shoes, and that's seen extremely rude. Or for example, handing over your business card. Like, I learned this in Singapore thanks to good relationships that I had with certain partners, because here you just hand your business card with, let's say if this is my business card, I hand it over with one hand. But in Asian countries, it's extremely important that you hold it with two hands and you bow when you give it. So these are all things that you will learn by doing, and of course also by having that, by being accessible to people. Let's say, like for me, I didn't know this, so my colleagues would tell me, and I think we all have to play a role in here. Like we as Chisom said, we don't know what we don't know, but I think we need to be there together, because we're all going to have different things that we know, and it's about sharing and giving each other the opportunity to learn. And then I think there's also a lot, of course, about the cultural stereotypes, right? Like there's a lot of stereotypes, unfortunately, but we have to be aware that those are stereotypes, that is not okay to to generalize something that happened towards one person to all the other people. Another one, I think, especially in corporate life, is the perception of time. And I've really seen this because of the opportunity of having worked in different continents. But punctuality and time management, for example, is a very, very important one, but it really differs from one culture to another. And also here, I think it's really important to communicate in an open and transparent way to set the right expectations. Because, for example, in the Middle East, when you say come for lunch, people can arrive at 4 or 5, and that's completely fine. While if I tell my Belgian friends come over for lunch, they'll be there at 12 sharp. So if I'm inviting people, if my guests are from different backgrounds and different cultures, and I say, guys, come over for lunch, I'm happy to host a lunch. I have to be precise and say, hey, lunch is served at 12, and at 2 we're gonna have coffee and dessert, for example. So I think as we have to just be, have to communicate clear and transparent and set the right expectations always.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Shahrzad. So much to circle back to there. And there's a few things like the cultural stereotypes that we're definitely going to touch on. But before we do, Eva, I'd just like to get your feedback on what some of the common barriers are to effective cross-cultural communication.
Well, Chisom and Shahrzad touched on most of them. I would like to just add to that psychological barriers that we may be used to a certain style of communication, and it's really uncomfortable, when we see some other style of communication and we have to adjust and we have to maybe like change the way we communicate. For instance, I come from quite a hierarchical culture. And at work, I was never used to like directly express my feedbacks or feelings or opinions to my superiors. But when I started working with Chisom, she had a totally different style. She was very direct. She expected directness, which I at the beginning didn't even kind of understand and didn't believe her. And it took me quite a while to actually start doing it and start being more comfortable with this way of communication. I still have to say that it's not something that comes to me first, and sometimes, I have to think and be very intentional if I want to do it. So that is one thing. But yeah, like I think I like it. I like this directness, and I don't mean rudeness in that sense, but I really like that directness, and this is something that I intentionally try to do. Also, fear of making mistakes is also something that prevents people from communicating with people from different cultures. Also, I would like to mention the remote teams in international companies. People don't get to interact with other teammates as much and build relationships like it's possible in traditional teams that interact in person in the office, which can make this kind of collaborations and cross-cultural communications a little bit more challenging. So what I would say is, I always like to look at myself first and start with myself. And Chisom and Shahrzad mentioned stereotypes and biases, and check that within ourselves, and check that the narratives we have about certain groups, and how we let them be unchallenged. Yes, be curious, build your empathy, because to me, empathy is basically basis of effective cross-cultural communication.
Thanks, Eva.
Yeah,
I'm
I think I'm going to stop here.
No, it was great because there's a couple of things that I just want to pick up on here, and I'm actually going to build it into a follow-up question because we've just talked about the barriers, and something that I find very fascinating in this topic, because it relates to me is body language. The reason I find it fascinating is because if there's one thing that really annoys me about myself, it's that I move my hands a lot when I'm talking, and sometimes I feel it's too much. So so on that note of body language, which is a really important part of our communication, right? How we move our bodies. I think Chisom's already mentioned, eye contact, something I'm really bad at personally. How do differences in this sort of verbal and non-verbal communication, particularly in this case, body language? Now I can't stop looking at myself moving my hands since I've mentioned that. I need to sort of sit on them, I think. How does body language impact sort of interpersonal interactions and teamwork? Anything to share there, or any experiences? Eva, do you move your hands a lot? I haven't noticed it before, but
Need to mute. Yeah, I mean, nonverbal communication, it's really amazing to think that it takes up around 80%. There's different information, but around 80% of our communication is actually nonverbal. It's our body language, it's our gestures, it's our facial expressions, our posture. So there are many misunderstandings that can arise from, like, you talk a lot about eye contact, and maintaining eye contact here in Europe means that you're attentive and respectful and assertive, while in other culture, like we have a teammate from South Korea, and just the other day we were talking about the differences, the cultural differences, and she said that, I mean, the amount of eye contact she experiences just on the street and like on a commute home from work is more than she experienced in her life in South Korea. So that is something, it was super interesting. It's also our mannerism. I don't know if you noticed, Chisom already mentioned the burping. But there are people from certain countries, especially women, that smile a lot. Like I don't smile that much. Like, okay, I'm not smiling, but you will not see me smiling constantly. And this can also affect interactions in the team, in the sense that you might seem rude or unfriendly. Also the handshakes that also Chisom mentioned, how in our culture, like firm and handshake with eye contact means that you're assertive, that you're honest, while in certain cultures it's not like that. So all of these values and beliefs and ways of communicating impact greatly how we engage at work, and how we work with our colleagues and superiors, and how much we contribute, how we engage, and how we are perceived, how comfortable we feel at work, and of course our feeling of belonging. I think here we also have to have in mind different identities like race and gender and class and religion and more, that also influence the way we communicate. If I may, just another minute, I would also like to mention here intent and impact, because a gap between those two can influence interactions within teams and among people in general. Many times when we communicate with diverse people, we have the best intention, but the message does not land the way we intended it, and it ends up hurting or even harming the other person.
Mhm.
And when we're confronted with it, the first reaction is usually defense. Oh, but I didn't mean it, and this is not what I wanted. And the conversation starts to revolve around that. But no matter what our intentions are, the person is still hurt. And this is when the impact, not the intent, needs to be centered. And in these situations, we need to take the feedback, apologize, and do better next time. It can be uncomfortable, but it's how we learn and foster open communication and understanding.
Thanks, Eva. I love the way that you've managed to nuance that with an intent and impact. And I see, Chisom, you've got a hand up there, so I'm going to bring you in. Do you have something to add on the firm handshakes or the intense prolonged creepy eye contact, or anything else that Eva's just talked about?
You're muted, Chisom.
Yes, thanks, Eva. More like a humbling confession. There was a time, I'm not proud of it, many years ago, around like early 2000s, where I was one of those people, when I got a handshake that was what I used to call flimsy, I would write people off. I'm not proud of it, but I think it's quite important to reflect on when, like our journey, like where we started. And I also saw that I also interpreted that flimsy handshake, like when it was a woman, it infuriated me more because I'm just like, you should be strong. You shouldn't do this. And then when it was a man, I was just like, they couldn't shake me like a man. And it's weird, but I had all of this. So just sitting here and hearing this and knowing that, I'm quite mortified to even think that there was a Chisom back then who believed these things. I think it's also important to look at the journey and say there was a time where I was, this SHIT head, right? Like it's like how my process has been, it's this ongoing learning process. So just wanted to share that, like we don't always start at the top. It's a journey.
I think you're even I can say that for me, it was like that maybe until 5 years ago. I really have to say that you're even beginning of 2000s. I've never even heard that. Oh, there can be a good thing in not like firm handshake.
And the interesting thing is that the pandemic kind of changed handshaking for a while, which I was very relieved about, that we actually stopped doing it altogether. I kind of miss that. I'm a bit of a germaphobe, so I've never been keen of the handshake thing. I think it naturally gave me a very, very flimsy, weak, sweaty handshake anyway. So I've always been one of those not giving out a very good handshake. But anyway, we digress. Thank you for that, Chisom. And Shahrzad, I'm going to come to you with the next question, please.
Can I add just one thing to what Eva
sure.
Chisom, I think just one more example is the eye contact piece. I think like in certain cultures, of course, like you mentioned, Far East, South Korea, but I think also the religious aspect is also one thing to eye contact. So for example, in certain countries in the Middle East, men will out of politeness not make eye contact with women, another way around. And this is actually considered very polite. So, but when those, let's say, people from a religious background from the Middle East, for example, of course, not everyone, but those that are very religious, would come then to the Western world, and then in a business context, whether if it's a man or a woman, would then also not make eye contact. If the manager or the teams are not aware, they will see that person. They will maybe think, oh, like that person is very indifferent, or is too shy, or is not serious, because when we're talking, they don't make eye contact. And I think this is the other aspect of it that we also have to keep into consideration as well.
Thanks. Really good point there, Shahrzad. So while I've got you, I'm going to follow on with this topic of communication, and I'm going to sort of put the slant more on organizations and workplaces. So in what ways can language barriers hinder effective communication, and how can organizations, you work at Expedia, a huge multinational organization, how can organizations address this challenge while also being mindful of inclusivity?
Thank you, Astrid. So I think if we go back to what I was sharing earlier, I think it's extremely important that when you're in a meet, if I just take, for example, when we're in a global team meeting, we work with different time zones, there's people dialing from all across the world, because we have over 70 offices. We're present in over 70 countries, sorry. So when we're at a team meeting and you of course don't necessarily know everyone, right? Because like maybe that you're just working with that person for this project and maybe they're sitting in a completely different org as yours. I think it's extremely important to really do proper introductions, first of all. And what we're really good at Expedia is that we always make sure that the employees are feeling comfortable, as in, for example, if we're trying to, let's say, first of all, I think there's a time zone piece. So, you know, if you work in a global team and you have projects, it's important to have rotation in calls so that it's not always those people that are, because of course Expedia, it's American, so very often time zone wise, it will be more sitting on the Hammer time zone, but it's important to rotate because if you have somebody who's on the call who's dialing in from Tokyo or from India, of course, it's very tricky. So it's important to have rotation in calls. So one time it's going to be time zone friendly for this region, and another time it's going to be for the other region, and that it's not always the same people that have to, you know, wake up at 3 in the morning or have to listen to recordings of calls. So I think that's one piece of it. And on the language piece, I think it's really important to have that space where people can easily yes, can you hear me better? My mic is just here. So I just got a message from someone saying that they can't hear me very clearly. I'll try to speak closer to the laptop. Another aspect is really making sure that everyone's comfortable. So, you know, if, for example, the meeting is being hosted in English and I'm not a native person, I should be feeling comfortable to say that out loud at the start of the meeting and say, hey, you know, I would appreciate if we could use a more simplified language, or this could also be something that that the manager or the leader of that project is it can share without calling out names. They can just say, hey, you know, let's listen. 30% of the people on this project are not native, so let's keep in mind. And I think these are some common guidelines that are very good to have when you're starting a certain project. But I think, yeah, these are the two first ones that I can think about. But then, of course, what's also there are a lot of tools that can help us to understand how the communication style or the cultural work style of one employee is versus another one. There's certain, I mean, there's the insights, of course, that some of you might know, where you work with colors, where it shows you, you know, are you more a direct person? Are you more focusing on data? Are you more focusing on, are you more an empathetic leader? There's this one, but there's also Globe Smart that we are also using internally, which is actually a great tool that can show you, for example, who in a team is a very big risk taker versus who's really someone who will never take risks, or who's someone who is very much focusing on numbers versus who is the person who is really focusing on relationship. And then based on those profiles, you can also make sure as a leader to match the different people in your teams to work better together. Because of course, if it's a project that is, let's say, risky, then you don't have to put people that are extremely cautious or other way around. Or if it's a project that requires a lot of relationship management with stakeholders, then it's really important to, you know, put more those people on that project rather than people that are really focusing on numbers and data. And once again, communicating around what's important to you and your communication style as well.
Thanks for that, Shahrzad. Was it Globe Smart, the tool that you mentioned?
Yes, Aperion, I think. Globe Smart, I'll double check.
Yeah.
Aperion,
I'm gonna go on to my next question. I'm just gonna need to ask you to check your sound, because I've also had a message that there's an echo in your sound. So when you turn your mic off, I don't know whether there's any adjustments you can do at your end just to make it a bit clearer potentially, so everyone can get the full value from hearing you. And thank you for your answer. I'm moving on to Chisom now with my next question. So Chisom, I think there's a real importance in this discussion to consider something that I feel goes hand in hand with your work, and that's compassion, compassionate leadership, compassionate thinking, not thinking we're the norm, and being able to tread in the shoes of someone else. So this idea of compassion and particularly empathy, I'm going to call it in this context, what role does empathy play in cross-cultural communication, and how can this then be cultivated in teams?
Right. Okay, I'm trying to think how I want to address this. I think if we look at the importance of empathy, which is trying to understand how other people feel, it is important in how we engage with each other, with colleagues, and as a leader, it's also quite important with how we engage with our team. Trying really that thing, like put yourself in somebody else's shoe. That's one of the ways we think about what is empathy, and we can use empathy as an enabler for bridging across cultures. And one of the ways to do this is to invest with curiosity into learning about other cultures. Now, it's also important to learn about your own culture, because oftentimes when we're learning about other people's culture, we're learning about their culture from like, oh, it's not the norm, but let me learn about them so I can better include them. So it's quite important to learn about your own culture and learn about other people's culture and center both as the norm. And I think part of unraveling from our cultures while staying within our culture is also asking why. Why do we do this like this? Why is it happening? I think that curiosity to understand better, these principles, norms, and values we have, where does it come from? Who does it serve? Can it be better? I'm not a believer of the, if it's not broken, don't fix it. I think if it's not broken, it can still be fixed because it's potentially broken for somebody else, right? Active listening goes a long way in terms of like, how do we observe? How do we listen? But also, how do we use curiosity to learn, the things we don't necessarily know? How can we build empathy and better understand people? Something else to share is action. Like, it's one thing to be curious about different cultures and you're in a position to be an ally and you're not. Right? How can you learn? How can you empathize? And how can you use that empathy and knowledge to act, to effect change, to act, to bring somebody into the room? If you're having a meeting and you see that there's somebody who's naturally, quiet, and maybe it's not in their culture or in their nature to raise your hands and share, is it potentially possible to reach out to them afterwards as a leader and say, hey, is there something you'd like to add to that? Because maybe you've noticed that they are better one-on-one. And there's this process of self-reflecting and learning. And then I do want to add a consideration. No matter how empathetic we are, no matter how compassionate we are, proximity is not the same thing as lived experience. The fact that you've read something in a book and you spent 5 years being passionate about something, you also have to wear a shoe to know where it hurts. You can empathize with people and try to put yourself in their shoe, but unless you're in that shoe, you really do not understand. So it's not the same thing as lived experience. So how do we ensure that when we engage and when we empathize, we still understand the position that we're sitting at? We still understand the privileges that we hold. We still understand that our love and compassion for a specific person does not mean that we truly understand what it is to be them, or that we understand what it is to be people like them.
Thank you, Chisom. I really like the way that you've nuanced empathy as being an enabler, and the idea of investing with curiosity, as you said, but also this importance of proximity and privilege and how that plays into it. So thank you for that. Eva, I'm sorry that I missed your hand up. I think the way my screen is, I've got people in boxes over your hands, so it's good that you message me next time. And as it goes, this question is for you anyway. So please pick up what you wanted to say in this question, and I've got a great question for you. So I think a lot of people tuning in today will be really keen to know the answer to this. I'm keen as well. Because this relates to what happens when things go wrong in cross-cultural communication. So in what ways, Eva, can misunderstandings arise? In what way can misunderstandings arising from cross-cultural differences lead to conflict within teams? Because we know this happens. And what kind of strategies can we use in workplaces to sort of build understanding, to mitigate conflict, and to sort of be embedded in more effective solutions in such situations?
I am unmuted. Thank you, Astrid. So yeah, disagreements and misunderstanding in diverse team are inevitable. So cultural conflicts can arise from differences in our values and norms of behavior of people from different culture. And they can arise from communication styles. We've been mentioning communication styles now a few times. You know, there are people, I also mentioned how there are people who come from cultures that communicate more directly. Some communicate more indirectly, that involve some subtle hints and gestures. I was just reflecting on this situation when I raised my hand and you just moved on, and then I asked you about it. You know how it also influenced my, like, I think that Chisom would be just like, hey, Astrid, I raised my hand, you know, and I was like, maybe Astrid just wants to go further. Maybe she's mindful of the time. So it's always also, I mean, I did send Astrid a message to ask her about it. So that is also one way to kind of be sure that misunderstandings don't happen, that I just don't, I'm not like, oh, Astrid just ignored me, she didn't see me. Yeah, so yeah, in this communication style situation, you know, the danger when direct and indirect a person come together is that person from a direct culture can think that a person from indirect culture is imprecise or evasive. The other way around could be that they just think that they're insensitive. There's also people who come from cultures that use more formal language at work, some more informal language. Also, conflicts can arise from attitudes toward hierarchy. And this one is quite interesting because I come from hierarchical country and I live in Norway that is informal communication style is the norm here, and not so hierarchical, at least that's what they say. So for instance, it can especially maybe affect like a junior team member that comes from a country that respects authority and doesn't voice their opinion and ideas during the meetings, while the senior team member actually expects them to do that. And this can lead to conflicts as the junior member reluctant to speak up, maybe perceived as disengaged, or a lack of competence by a senior member. And of course, there's also work ethics. And for me, that one is really interesting because like Norway is a country that has a very good life-work balance here. And people, when they finish their work, they finish either at 3 or at 4, sometimes at 5, they're done. And when people that come from like the US or the UK, where, you know, working hours are like endless, when they come here, they perceive Norwegians as lazy. And oh my God, they don't do anything. What kind of a productivity is that? So this is also something that can influence how we see each other, and maybe even conflict or approach to deadlines. There are cultures that, like, I can say, I think mostly like Germany, mostly in Europe, deadlines are very strict. So if we say that this must be done by this date, it must be done by this date. But there are cultures that are a little bit more flexible, and deadlines are just suggestions. So this is also something that, especially in a multinational companies, can bring the conflict, because you know those cultures, by for instance Europeans, can be perceived as lazy, not hardworking, even inconsiderate. So regarding the conflict resolution strategies, the first thing that is good to acknowledge is that the conflict actually arose because of the cultural differences. So that needs to be clarified. Thank you. And then, of course, foster an open and honest communication regarding the problem, where each party can express what they found offensive. And respect is very important here. It's important in facilitating dialogue and healthy discussions. So the whole thing doesn't turn into a debate who's right and who's wrong. And respectful disagreements are not necessarily a bad thing. So disagreements or conflicts can actually be an opportunity to learn and to grow. Of course, active listening, it was already mentioned, the importance of it in cross-cultural communication, of course, in conflict resolution. It's listening to understand, not to respond, seeking clarification when messages are unclear or ambiguous, and asking clarifying questions.
Thanks, Eva. I'm just going to stop there because I'm really pleased with how much you've packed into that answer. Particularly love the focus here on hierarchy and work ethic and the cultural differences. Super good points. I'm still haunted by the first time 12 years ago when I started working in Norway, and like the CEO came and sat next to me, and being quite a socially awkward person, it was the longest, hardest lunch I've ever had to get through, sitting next to the CEO. Things like that didn't happen in the UK. So I can totally relate to that. So thanks very much. And we're now 1 minute from being 1 hour into this session. So audience, thank you for staying with us this far. We still have more to come, more greatness to come. If you're still there, if you're still in, please feel free to send us an emoji, write something in the chat with how it's going so far. I'm going to switch things up a little bit in the last half hour. You're also knowledgeable on this subject, but I want to try and pack in another 2 rounds of answers. I'm really hoping we can try and keep the answers to around 4 minutes. And just while you get sort of lost in your answers, what I'll do to help here is, when we hit the 3-minute mark, I'll just send a little heart to you on the screen, just as a non-passive aggressive friendly reminder that we're nearing time, and then we can really pack a lot of information into these last few sessions. So Eva, thank you. Shahrzad, I'm going to come on to you next with a sort of follow-up question to this, because Eva's given us a really kind of valuable reflective answer here around the what happens with conflicts, particularly conflicts around misunderstandings related to cross-cultural communication. So I'm going to sort of stay in that lane really with leaders, because leaders play such an important role in cross-cultural communication within organizations. And what I'd like to ask you is how can leaders effectively promote a culture of inclusivity and sort of respect for diversity within their teams, particularly in a context where there are certain cultural groups who may be, for example, marginalized or underrepresented?
Thank you, Astrid. And thank you, Eva, for all your insights shared as well earlier on the topic. I mean, as your question, like, what can leaders do
do to make a company or to make an environment more inclusive? I think one of the key factors is always to lead by example. I think this is really the first goal, not only in this aspect, but I think if there's anything that you want, any positive changes that you want to bring within a company, or I often say within your family, right? It's, for parents to lead by example. And I think in a company it's the same way. It's for the leaders and for the management to lead by example. If we want to have, let's say, more diversity within the C-levels or within the management, or when you want to emphasize on inclusivity, it's also important that this is reflected. So this is also one piece of it. And I'm actually extremely grateful to work for Expedia. That is a company where we have, for example, our new CEO, Arjan. She's a woman. We have our CFO and our CTO who are also women. So like these are things that are very important as well. And I think when you were saying about the inclusivity piece, so there's a lot of different things. I think one of the key factors is really to make sure that people can communicate and that they can raise their voice when something is happening. If we just look at what's happening in the world currently, there's so many tragic things going on at in different regions, and we have, of course, employees that are coming from different backgrounds. Some are in regions where there's a lot of conflict happening. So, for example, it's important that they feel comfortable and come to the IND team, to Inclusion and Diversity team, to express that they're concerned, to express that, let's say, they cannot focus because of everything that's happening. And then as an answer, the IND team, for example, will set up safe spaces to make sure that the teams can express their feelings, to make sure that the teams can be not guided, that's not the right word, but are supported, let's say. So I think that's one thing. The other piece is, I think, Eva, you also mentioned this, it's really about celebrating diversity. So at Expedia Group, we have 8 inclusion business groups, and we have several community business groups. So ACE, the one that I'm leading as the VP, is one of our inclusion business groups. And these are all actually, the inclusion business groups are all linked to communities that are coming from from underrepresented identities. So for example, we have BEAM, which is for the Black Expedients. We have ACE for Asians. We have LEAD for the Latins. We have IDEA for the Indigenous. We have AIM, which is for people with disabilities. And we have Pride, which is the LGBTQIA+ community. We have VETS for the veterans. And all of these play a big role in order to create awareness around these communities at a bigger scale and at a wider scale. And each of these communities, we have very high-level senior sponsors. So it's also important that you have the support from someone who's very senior. Because let's say if there's an event happening, if the invite is coming from that very senior people, let's say people are going to be more enthusiastic to join it. And I'll pause here.
Thanks, Shahrzad. Really, so fascinating to find out more about the initiatives being taken by Expedia. And if we've got more time today, I'd love to circle back to that and hear more, because I think there's some enormously interesting insights there. Chisom, this next question is for you. And this is an extremely important question as far as I'm concerned, because we've touched on this. We're going to come back to stereotypes in cross-cultural communication. So can you talk to us about how, in your view, stereotypes and bias affect communication between individuals from different cultural backgrounds? And as a follow-up, what kind of strategies can be employed in workplaces to mitigate the influence of stereotypes? If you can give any concrete examples as well, that would be wonderful.
Right. So one of the most significant barrier to effective cross-cultural communication, essentially stereotyping. It's our tendency to quantify people and make assumptions about them, mainly based on their demographic identifier, things like their age, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, even like religion, nationality, and we see how this shows up subconsciously. So stereotypes are, informed by cultural, social, nature, conditioning over time. So oftentimes, so this is kind of like when we talk about unconscious bias, these are ideas that we have about people without even knowing them. But these are also ideas that we have without knowing that we have them. Sometimes the unconscious biases that we hold can actually go against what our conscious, inclusive mind, believes and thinks. So you can have positive-ish stereotypes like Asians are good at math. I'm sure there are many Asians who are not good at math, or that Africans can run fast because I can't, and I'm African, right? But those are more or less positive stereotypes. They could be annoying, but they're not necessarily always like damaging or detrimental. And then you have more negative stereotype where you see somebody who is, say, outside of the within the Western structure is considered overweight, and then you automatically think that person is lazy or they don't care for themselves, and as a result, you can't trust them, you can't work with them, or you just treat them as though they are less than, right? And oftentimes, stereotypes are really quite informed by the things we see on TV, the conversations that we have, what we see in the newspapers. A specific example that is coming up for me, which happened quite recently, there is a conference that happened or is happening, and this conference is incredibly homogeneous. There is some diversity. You have about 65% women and 45% men, so within the binary, but all the speakers, each and every one of them are whites. So like I do sometimes when I am triggered, I reach out to the hosts and I say, hey, just out of curiosity, have you considered that this could be more diverse, especially given the topic that you were covering? Just curious, if you thought about it or if it was not considered, because I recognize that sometimes, we only do what we know. And for some people, and especially within the Nordic construct, diversity is just gender, and that gender representation within the binary needs to happen for white men and white women. And they responded to me and say, and they said, I'm going to ignore this combative message. And I thought my message was super nice. I shared it with a lot of different people. Now, instead of just assuming that this person is a racist or this or that, I just posed the question. Would you consider you would experience my message as combative if, one, I was a man, and two, if I was a white person? And just something for them to reflect on, because they might not actually reflect on the fact that they've experienced my messaging as combative because of how I present, right? So how to handle these situations is even I want to be mindful not to put the responsibility on the person who's at the receiving end of the stereotype. But if you can, within a workplace environment where there is trust, where you have good intentions, where you can reach out and call people in or out, that you also ask a question and say, this is how I'm experiencing this, but can you actually consider why you experienced it like this? And you might get back, oh my gosh, I didn't even consider that. I'm not sure why I thought you were combative or this or that. I hope that helps or answers the question.
Thank you, Chisom. Thank you for sharing, and particularly thank you for sharing the experience of being described as combative, which it's basically a different take on angry, I would say. Combative is, so there's a whole lot of problems that go with a word like that, and Yeah, really, really good example of how stereotypes can play out and also do harm. So thank you for that. I'm going to come to a next question, which is going to be the same one for all of you, actually. This question is, again, I think an important one. It's right up my street because as English is my native tongue, I'm oftentimes a bit of an embarrassing monologue of sorry, thank you, please, excuse me. And the fact is, different cultures have different communication styles, yet we're often looking at English being the gold standard for how we communicate. And I'm absolutely not endorsing that in any way. So with different cultures having different communication styles, some which might be interpreted as rude, some that might be interpreted as too passive, too flimsy. How do we navigate the fine line between being rude, direct, or polite, especially in this cross-cultural context? And let's consider two key aspects in answering this. One would be communication styles within sort of teamwork, collaboration, workplaces. And the other emphasis would be, again, this sort of idea of when conflict arises and how we can ensure that cultural differences are not being used as excuses for bad behavior, because that's also something that can be quite problematic. So I'm going to leave it out to whoever's feeling the vibe of this question and would like to answer first.
I'm happy to go first. Thank you. I think this is a very important question, Astrid. I think so. There's a couple of things. So of course, being aware of cultural awareness, right? Like who is your audience? Who is your business partner? Who's your conversation partner that you're interacting with? That's one piece of it. And the adaptability is also important, like being open and being flexible in your communication style. And definitely also paying attention once again to the verbal and non-verbal pieces of how you interact, but also often we say that it's important to mirror your conversation partner when you're in business conversations, let's say. And I think this goes really also in the cultural aspect. And then of course there's respectful communication, right? Like I think it's just put yourself in the shoes of the other. I think this is very important to make sure that you interact in a way that you would love people to interact with you, right? Like if you're hesitant about something and you, for me, it's like the moment you're hesitant about saying something or not, I'm like, just don't say it then. Or ask, say like, is it okay if I say it in this way or if I say it in that way? If you're hesitant, I think it's important to let your conversation partner know that you're hesitant and that you're also learning. And then clarity and directness, of course, in every culture is perceived in a different way. So also there, like set the right expectations. The way you write emails, is it very short? Are you using emojis? Like how do you do that? Very often, I personally find when I'm working on certain projects, and this is, I think, this is also maybe cultural, but very often what I do when I have to send my opinion on something where I know, of course, that there's certain tools like in Slack, it's also transcripting it, but I use voice messages because I feel the tone of voice that I have when I'm speaking about something, when I'm like, it's very easy to say I'm so excited, but when you're really excited, like you can hear it in your voice. So I encourage my colleagues to do it, like, oh my God, that's so funny. Like I use this only with friends, like personal. I never do this like in a business context. But I'm like, I know we will not be able to jump on a Zoom because of time zone. So I just use over Slack the voice messaging. And they either way, even like if they want to keep it or share it with other colleagues, they can just forward, let's say, the written piece around it. And then I think the last one I would like to add is really about seeking feedback and clarification. So at Expedia, we have I think this is very American. It's a very feedback driven culture. And with AIDS, our Asian community right now, what we are also doing is that we are actually giving So we are hosting sessions because our observance month is just around the corner. It's in May. We're actually hosting sessions on how to give and receive feedback based on different Asian cultures, just to make sure that leaders, teams are comfortable also to give and receive feedback. Because once again, like if you work with someone from the Far East, the whole aspect of giving and receiving feedback is very different.
Absolutely fascinating insights there. Thank you, Shahrzad. And I'm really also really pleased that you touched on the advice around the ask philosophy. You know, if in doubt, you know, asking for permission to ask something can go a long way to give someone agency in a conversation, or to know whether that question is welcome or not, as the case may be. Eva, Chisom, anything to add there to that question?
Yes, I was thinking, I think when we were having a prep call, Shahrzad and I guess maybe found similarity in the directness in our cultures, right? It's like, and I had shared that, you know, when I went back to Nigeria, and I'd put on a little bit of weight, you know, a lot of my friends and the parents of my friends, they're like, Chisom, are you eating all the rice in the US? Right? And then when I lose weight, it's like, oh, wow, are you trying to be, you know, like Western? You're too skinny. And they're quite direct with this. And for me, it's almost expected. So I don't consider that rude. But also reflecting on, if somebody has said that to me in Norway or the US, I'm going to be like, what the hell? So I think also understanding the context of the information and the culture has been something to continually unpack. And I think for somebody, like at least for me, where I navigate between, you know, say 3 nationalities, cultures, and different people, it's trying to understand my culture and their culture, but also drawing a line on, you know, what is rude. This also comes up for me, you know, when we talk about your question was not as an excuse for bad behavior, because recently it's also been coming up in my space that when somebody is rude, like, oh, they're rude because they're neurodivergent. It's like, I'm neurodivergent. I'm not rude. At least I try not to be rude. You know, so how do we not use people's culture or the directness as an excuse for bad behavior and rudeness? And there has to be that line of both hearing feedback, as Shahrzad said. It's like, what is the feedback here? If somebody calls you in or out and say, the way you express that, I found it to be rude. I found it to be unacceptable. You need to be able to not center, oh, but in my culture, this is just how we say it, right? You need to be able to also meet people where they're at. It doesn't mean we need to change. So there's a difference between integrating and assimilating within the workplaces that we engage in, right? So we don't have to change, but we have to recognize that when we talk to different people, we cannot just offload how we are fully onto them without understanding that we might have some pushback. So I think it's that ongoing dance. It's that whole thing about cross-cultural communication is you don't do a course and you've got it, right? Like it's an ongoing thing and you have to adapt it depending on the person, the teammate, the colleague, the leader that you're engaging with. So it's contextual and it's a case-by-case basis, but there needs to be a lot of humility in receiving that feedback.
Thanks, Chisom. And Eva, I'd love to come to you next to hear your answer on this. And if you could bring this nuance in, I know it's something you and I have talked about previously. Can humor in these contexts sort of help or hamper the situation? Because I believe that humor can be this really powerful tool sometimes in building understanding or bridging gaps. But what's your view on this?
Well, you know me, Astrid, and you know I use humor a lot. And I think that humor for me, it's just it's a way to make a good atmosphere. It's a way to kind of bring us together. For me, it's also a way to release stress, because, you know, we also kind of always go to places that are easiest for us, which are not negative, because I can also be quite a reactive person. And, you know, the last thing you want in cross-cultural communication is to be reactive. So humor is also something that keeps me, gives me this space of taking a step back, at least for me. And I also wanted to say regarding this, like trying to get this line, not to be rude and direct and polite and all of this. As I said, I can be quite reactive, and for me, it's really important, especially when I try to give feedback to my teammates about their work, to also be very, very conscious and very, very aware of what I'm feeling and what's going on, and taking a breath and checking with myself where I am, and then communicating what I want to say. And here, I think it's really good if you're really honest, and if you say, this makes me feel like this, I would really like this to be a bit different. And it managed to keep the connection and the communication without like hard feelings or misunderstandings.
Thanks very much, Eva. Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. We've got about 8 minutes left before we go into the Q&A session. So what I'm going to do here, I've got one more question for Chisom, actually, on leadership. Then I'm going to do a wrap-up question, a very quick fire answer from all of you, and then we will be ready to go into the questions from the audience. So anyone on LinkedIn Live or anyone that's at this session today, please feel free to start writing your questions in the group chat. And Chisom, this is the sort of last question directly to you, which is really important. We have touched on it a little bit, but not enough as far as I'm concerned. And what I want to talk about is the importance of leadership in this topic. So let's talk about leadership. You're a leader, you're also a consultant, you have worked with leaders on this topic. What are the main competencies that a leader should have when navigating communication in a cross-cultural setting? And where are some leaders failing to do this? So in effect, what do leaders really need to do to raise their game?
Well, thanks for the question. I think it depends on the context and on the skills they currently have. But I think that one of the with regards to like cross-cultural communication, I'm thinking a lot about servant leadership, like servant leadership, where you're following. You're not just telling people like this is how things needs to be done, that you're actually willing to take a sit back and learn, more importantly, unlearn, you know, what you think you know, how you think you engage. And I think so leaders who do well are leaders who are curious, leaders who are humble, who recognize that to lead, they also have to follow. Leaders who understand that they are not the norm, and leaders who know that even though they have a proven way of doing something, doesn't negate that there might be 50, 100, 1 million other ways to do the same thing also successfully. So leaders also that have empathy and compassion and who have the ability to, you know, meet their people where they are. I think there are some people who have no business being leaders. And I think that having that honest conversation with oneself is important, because you have leaders based on the fact that, you know, it's formal, based on the role that you have, you're director of something, you're C-level something, and that automatically makes you this formal leader. And then leaders, good leaders, formal or informal, need to understand what they are good at. So know what you don't know, right? There are some people who, I've worked with leaders who say, Chisom, I'm not good with people. I understand that. So I need somebody else else who's better at working with people. I'm good just like getting the stuff done, handing out the instructions, and maybe listening, but I'm not really good with engaging with people. And I think we need to have those conversations more, because in my circle over the past couple of months, there's been so much, problems with leadership at workplaces of different sizes, literally across the world. And this has also informed our next panel discussion, where we're looking at toxic leadership, because toxic leadership also means that you're really unable to meet your people where they are. You're unable to communicate with them in a way that is respectful, in a way that respects who they are as a person, and in the way that celebrates and encourages them to continue to thrive. So I think that's a bigger conversation that needs to be had. But know what you don't know what skills you don't have, and actively learn, knowing that you can learn more and you can also unlearn.
That learning and unlearning again, it's it's just such a timeless consideration for leaders, isn't it? And also really interesting insights as well about not every leader has the people skills. It's important that that's talked about, that it's recognized. It's obviously something that you've come across in your work as well. So thank you for that. Okay, last 3 minutes of our session, I'm going to give you 1 minute each to do a final evaluation. I mean, we often end these sessions with a top tip. So what I would like from you is either a top tip for celebrating and fostering inclusion, the inclusion of cross-cultural communication at work, or in a non-work setting, it could be how to foster inclusion in cross-cultural communication in daily interactions and engagements. So I think, Eva, I'm going to come to you first on what your top tip is. If you can very kindly keep it to 1 minute, that would be really appreciated. Take it away, Eva.
Are you afraid I'm going to take it again, and don't stop ever? Yeah, there's so many things to say here on this topic, but yeah, I would just like to invite people to be curious, stay curious, and engage with people from different culture. I've been working with a team that each team member is from a different country, and that's how it's been since then. And I learned so much about myself and also about other culture, about other people. Yes, so don't shy from that, even if it's not always comfortable and it's not always easy.
Stay curious and stay engaged. That's really, really good advice and wisdom there. Thank you, Eva. You actually had another 30 seconds, but I'm going to yield your time for someone else. Yeah, Shahrzad, Chisom, who would like to go next with their sort of top tip and key take home for everyone tuning in today?
I'm happy to go. So I would say be conscious of cultural differences and take the time to get to know your conversation partner. And secondly, I would say lead with empathy and be curious to learn and be open to feedback, to receive and to give feedback. And then thirdly and lastly, I would say educate yourself and own your mistakes. Don't be shy of making mistakes. I think that's the way we learn, but as long as you're owning them.
That's a really really great take home for everyone today around owning mistakes and educating yourself and just being conscious of the cultural differences as well. Thank you so much. Chisom, final word to you then.
Just affirming what Shahrzad said, responsibility and accountability goes a long way, and do not let your mistakes deter you from trying. And I think just to reiterate the things I already said, we're not the norm. We don't know what we don't know. Don't make assumptions, rather ask questions, listen to understand, not to respond. And of course, proximity is not the same thing as lived experience. So empathy is wonderful, but recognize that proximity is not the same as actual lived experience.
Great, thank you, Chisom. Responsibility and accountability are without a doubt two pieces that I think everyone tuning in can take home today. And with that, we are into our question round now. So for everyone that's still here, thank you for sticking around. I hope you've enjoyed this first part of the session. Please don't go anywhere, because we have 30 minutes lined up now for your questions, which will take us into the to the end. 3 o'clock today, we're planning to finish. I'm going to go into the chat and see if there is anything. Haven't had a chance to look yet, but really good to see you all engaging and sharing some of your insights. And we have a question here from
Astrid. I'm also trying to help you copy and paste it to you directly, because it's a lot of questions in the thread. But I've just, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. So I think the first one I can see is from, is it Itzel? And this is a question which is, how can employees feel safe to request that their manager, who comes from a very hierarchical culture, that cultural differences should be respected and acknowledged to avoid conflict or misunderstandings? It's a really great question. Who would like to have a go at this question here? Oh yeah, Shahrzad, would you like to answer? Thanks, I've just seen your hand.
No worries, thank you. I think this is a really, really good question. I think so. Of course, it depends on the relationship that the employee has with their management, with their direct manager or +2. I think this is, of course, if you can have that conversation directly, you can share it in an open way. If you don't have that relationship, I think what is really a good way to do this, which we've also done with our teams internally, is to set up anonymous surveys in which the teams do not have to give their names unless they really want to give their names. But of course, then this has to be done on a wider scale, right? Because let's say, like, if you're only sending out this survey to a team of 10 people and there's only one person who's, let's say, from a different background, then that's of course too obvious. Then I think it's really important that they do this for wider, for other teams as well. What we've done and what we are doing at Expedia is actually the self-ID survey, and through the self-ID survey, we actually collect a lot of sensitive information, which is only allowed in certain countries. So, for example, in most of the European countries, we cannot do that. But through the self-ID survey, we've actually had the opportunity to really change certain HR rules and certain benefits that we're offering to our employees. And that's fully anonymous.
Thank you very much, Shahrzad. There's quite a few questions to go through, so I'm going to move on to the next question. And this one is again, it's about leaders in organizations. So there's a running theme here with these questions, the question here is around leaders in organizations who are telling people that they need to become tougher. And not be offended or not feel uncomfortable, especially if the intent is good, and communication mistakes can happen. So this question was about wanting to know what the panel think of this. Leaders who do that, are we okay with that? Do you have any advice that you could offer there? I can see both Eva and Chisom nodding. So whoever would like to step in with an answer, please go ahead.
I can start. We come across this quite often, and what this does is it deflects responsibility from the leaders and put the onus of understanding onto the people who are being harmed. And, all these things like, oh, get tougher, don't get offended. Like, the intention is good. If your good intention continues to harm me, it's not a good intention. I don't care where it's coming from, right? So it's who has responsibility to actually make a change. And that leader needs to go to leadership school. I'm sorry, because it's like a leader would say, okay, what can I learn from this? How can I meet people where they are? And this goes back to what Eva talked about, intent versus impact, where we're focusing attention on the good intent, but not in the harm that is causing. And this has their consequences for workplaces, because if as a colleague under a toxic leader, that I'm not able to thrive, that I'm being harmed, guess what? A lot of my headspace at work is there trying to like focus on being well, of presenting a certain way, of protecting myself, that I'm not spending time being productive, that I'm not spending time being innovative or actually doing the actual work. So it is expensive financially. And it also has, there are consequences for the mental health. So this leads to workplaces where you see a high turnover, people taking sick leave, people quitting, and this is something that continues to happen. So I think that it is not your responsibility to not be offended. It is the responsibility of the leader and the workplace to ensure that there is a safe environment where, one, microaggressions are reduced, and two, if they do happen, because we're human and our brains make mistakes, that they are not dismissed or invalidated, because that just makes it worse.
Great answer. Thank you so much for that, Chisom. That was really, I guess for me, there's an inherent problem, isn't there, in propagating this myth that people need to toughen up, and we know this is also inherent in cultivating very toxic workspaces as well. So next question in the thread I'm going to come to is to do with measures. So we have another question, which is, what measures can be implemented to ensure respectful and inclusive communication practices across all levels of an organization? So I'll leave that out there to the panelists on who would like to tackle that. Yeah.
I can share something that we've also done internally a couple of years ago. So we have a team who's working on IND learning team, so the Inclusion Diversity Learning Team. And they've, of course, set up different courses and trainings for the teams. And one of them is called the Allyship Workshop. And this workshop has became mandatory 4 years ago. And because within a company, of course, when we have teams from different backgrounds and everything, it's extremely important to have allies as well, to have people, that will use their voice to help underrepresented identities within the company. And the allyship workshop is actually a way that we have encouraged really our teams to be aware of, first of all, what is an ally? Like, how can you help your colleagues and your teams to communicate in an effective way, to make sure that they're aware of cultural differences. And this has received a very, very positive feedback. And of course, it's really important to make this mandatory for everyone, because otherwise it's always the same people that will be taking those courses.
Yeah. Anyone want to add anything onto that? Thank you, Shahrzad, for your answer.
You're welcome.
Yes, Astrid. I was just thinking, when we work with the companies on their DEI, diversity and inclusion initiatives, along with the training and awareness, which is very, very important, it's quite important that companies have policies and practices in place when it comes to inclusive communication, when it comes to what kind of communication is not allowed and where there is zero tolerance. And of course, what are the processes that follow that and kind of repercussions for harming somebody else, being discriminatory, etc.
Thank you, Eva. We've got another couple of questions. I've had one come in via LinkedIn, and there's another one in the chat here. So I'm going to finish off with what we have in the meeting chat. So this question is about strategies. What strategies can individuals employ? Sorry, it just it just dropped out.
Sorry, I was just replying to that on the chat, but it says, what strategies can individuals employ to create meaningful connections with colleagues from diverse cultural backgrounds?
Thank you, Shahrzad. Yeah, thanks. So who'd like to answer that?
I think Shahrzad had already written something in the chat. Do you want to share?
Sure. So actually, I was sharing to Fabi that we have something that's called Random Coffee. So you can just sign up to this, I don't know how you call it, to this initiative, let's say. And then the tool, the Random Coffee initiative is going to match you with someone within the company in a very random way. And this offers you actually the opportunity to connect with that person for a 30-minute random coffee. And of course, if you like, you can stay connected to that person. So we do this globally for all employees. And then we also do this for people that are part of certain IBGs, so the inclusion business groups, or who are part of certain CBGs. And the community business groups are, for example, we have a community that's called Friends of Grief, a community that's called Return from Maternity. We have a community that's called Parents and Caregivers. We have a community that is encouraging people to, to how to be more environment friendly and sustainable. So then you can actually sign up for this if you want to be matched with someone that is in one of these communities, or just anyone who is an employee at Expedia.
Wow, I don't know about anyone else, but I really want to work there. This sounds great with all these community groups. What a phenomenal initiative for tackling exactly some of the challenges that we're talking about here. Chisom, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I wanted to, and Shahrzad has shared, when you work at such a large organization, then it's quite important to have this like safety of the groups. When you work in smaller organizations, I think within the workplace culture and structure, a lot can be done to create a community sense of, say, for example, inviting the new person to lunch each time, or like having not designated lunch areas, but mixing up the groups. If you have smaller teams, so even within larger organization, maybe the team leader can institute say the agile meeting set up in the morning, but also like people can share something about themselves. In our workplace, we do the what's good and what's new, which sometimes is hard because every single day you have to say what you're grateful for. And sometimes it's like, I woke up, I drank coffee, yay, but still it creates opportunities for people to engage. And just to reference this question as well, because the question is, what strategies can individuals employ to create meaningful connections with colleagues from diverse cultural backgrounds? I think depending on the workplace and how that culture is integrated into how they engage, every single person at that workplace could have a diverse cultural background. And I think that is why it's important that we just meet people where they are, not just because the challenge as well is we don't want to tokenize a colleague who are like, oh, you're so different from us. We're all quite different. Diversity is a fact, right? Diversity just means that there are people who we have within our workplace, and how can we engage with them? How can we ensure that, we take our time to reach out to that person who's a bit quiet. I think Shahrzad had said earlier about how even when you're putting teams to work on projects together, being mindful about the different personalities you mix also gives people opportunity to connect even further. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
It's great.
Can I
Thank
add
you.
also something?
Yeah, Eva, please
Astrid?
do.
So I love this what you said, Chisom, that actually we are connecting to people, and I think this is the first thing that we always have to have in mind, is that we are connecting to a person. All of these are people, not like I don't know, a French person, an English person, or an Indian person, right? So thank you for that, Chisom. I also wanted to mention when Shahrzad and Chisom were saying, like we have a big company, like Diversify is a much smaller organization, and we have a much smaller team. So what we do is a community lunch. And this is super nice because there's always someone from different country or a different teammate who is making lunch from their own country. It can be very simple with simple ingredients, but we get together, people from the Diversify team, people from the community, we come together, we eat, and you basically learn something about somebody else's culture, but also brings you together. Yeah.
Food, yes, yes.
Food.
Food is one of the best ways to connect. Yeah.
I totally agree. Food
Couldn't
and
agree more.
drinks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And your community lunches, they've been going for what, a good 3.5, 4 years now, and super popular. The old adage of breaking bread together, sitting together, really appreciating a good meal. It's so connective, isn't it? We have one more question in the chat here. I'm just going to go back to it. So this is a question again to everyone. It does circle back to something that we have touched on, something that I think is very interesting when it comes to discussing this topic. What are some of the common misconceptions about cross-cultural communication, and how can they be addressed? Who would like to go first with that?
That it's hard. And I think we talk about it with a lot of different things, like, oh, diversity is hard. So people feel like they need to get a cookie when they hire people in the society. So this is a thing. And someone, I forget who, that I was talking to recently, so if I remember, I need to give them credit for it, said something about when we talk about things that are hard, that there are some people, oh, yeah, I remember who, Anthony, talked about the fact that as human beings, there are companies that literally put together stuff, tools, and bury it deep in the ocean, and they're able to articulate that, right? That they're engineers who are able to do hard things. So talking to people across culture, we can do, right? It's that whole idea of we can do hard things. And people seem quite receptive to doing hard things until it includes like diversity and inclusion and engaging with people like, oh my gosh, that's hard. That's uncomfortable. But this entire universe, the world, the fact that we exist, is here because it's hard and we do it anyway. So just wanted to add that.
And if I can just add, Chisom, when you were saying about the comfortable piece, I think we also have to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. So it's extremely important to, have sessions that are talking about certain topics, which, usually we wouldn't talk about. And also that is different from one culture to another. But once again, it's important that the leaders drive these conversations. Because we're living, it's 2024, like it's time to break certain taboos and to be having conversations that sometimes are very uncomfortable to have them, but it's only by stretching our minds and having these kind of conversations that we can make progress and move forward.
And just to quickly add to that, sorry, I just wanted to say, I know Eva just unmuted. I wanted to say that building up on what Shahrzad just said, is being comfortable with the uncomfortable. We can also reflect on the fact that when the most learnings we do is when we're uncomfortable, be it by studying a new language, by taking a new course, by trying to dance, like dance a new style. Like it is uncomfortable, but that is where the most learning happens. So we need to lean into that discomfort and see it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Absolutely. And I think on top of that, Chisom, there's also the piece of like, maybe certain things are okay for a certain person, not for another. And also there it's okay. And you can agree to disagree, right? Like we don't have to all agree on the same communication styles, on whether if it's good. No, you have to communicate in a very direct way, or you don't, I don't know, like some people are a fan of certain things. It's okay. Like we don't all have to agree on the same things as well. But because I just think that, having different perspectives is going to make teams stronger. Not if everyone agrees on the same topic, then it will just be extremely boring.
I really feel there's a new hashtag to come out of this conversation, which is something like hashtag discomfort makes you smarter. Just a thought.
Absolutely.
Eva.
I just wanted to say that one of the misconceptions, and then what I've also heard is like, oh, let's not talk about our differences. They only just divide us. Let's talk about only things that bring us together, which is so not true. I remember this saying of Audre Lorde. She said, it's not the differences that divide us, it's the lack of acknowledging, accepting, and celebrating our differences that divide us. So this is something that, you know, it would be nice to also wrap up with, you know, the celebration of the differences, acknowledge the differences, celebrate the differences, because they also can bring us together. And of course, you know, always having in mind that we are talking to a person, not a communication style or you know, to a boss, you know, from a different country.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's still no one size fits all approach when we're talking about this. So it looks like we have around 8-9 minutes left, and I think there's another couple of questions to get through. So this one here in the chat is again to all of you, and this is I would define it as perhaps more of a personal lived experience question. So in which spaces do each of you feel most comfortable to communicate without being unseen, misunderstood, or any other challenge rise in regards to communication? Great question. Thank you so much for that. And who would like to go first?
Crickets.
I was wondering, is the question, Maxi, you mean feeling most comfortable or uncomfortable? Because comfortable, like in general, like I feel comfortable in, you know, in my work environment or in my personal environment.
The question specifically says comfortable. In where do you feel most comfortable? Yeah.
At this moment, there's not a lot of spaces I feel uncomfortable, because I feel like I've done and I've led a lot of conversations where I really pushed myself out of my comfort zone, because I really like to challenge people. So where I'm most comfortable, like I'm really comfortable with my team. You know, in a professional environment, I'm very comfortable, but I think maybe this is also thanks to, you know, having been at Expedia for so long, knowing all the teams. So maybe it's also related to that piece. But in general, yeah, I'm very comfortable. I mean, even, you know, right now being in this call, like I feel, you know, I'm having these conversations with people, the audience is here because they want to learn, and that makes me feel comfortable. If I knew that, you know, you all have to sign up because it's a must for all your, I don't know, for your KPIs, for example, that would make me feel more uncomfortable, because then you wouldn't be here out of your own intent.
Thanks for sharing. I'm thinking, I think I'm most comfortable with my village. So in spaces where I don't have to edit my thoughts, I think as much as I engage in discussions and in different spaces and rooms where I have access and power, I often find myself having to think sentences ahead. You know, how do I say something? How do I manage somebody's fragility? How do I anticipate, you know, how somebody might react to something? And I experience the world at an intersection of the identities that I carry. And two of the most visible identities are that I'm a woman and I'm Black. And that affects how the world sees me sometimes and how I see myself in the world. So I have to anticipate certain things. So in spaces where I can exhale, where I don't have to edit my thoughts, I feel most comfortable. And that's with my friends. And sometimes, you know, I just want to rant or, you know, curse, not that anyone should curse too much, but, you know, like just being myself and knowing that I can say something and not spend 2 hours trying to explain what I said, that I could say the thing in whichever way it comes out and they get it. Like I feel held. And then, of course, in public spaces or professional spaces, I can tell you the minute I walk into any room that is not diverse, I feel uncomfortable. Everything in me just like I'm holding my breath, you know, and it's because that room has not been designed for me or anybody who is different. So I also find that I feel very comfortable in spaces that are very diverse, because I walk in there and I'm like, okay, even if I'm the only Black person there, but I can see other identities present, I'm like, all right, you've thought about a bunch of us, and that makes me comfortable. So yeah. Of course, at home with my babies watching Netflix. So yeah.
Thank you for that, Chisom. And Eva, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
For me, comfortableness is usually, well, basically always connected to safety, how safe I feel somewhere. And yeah, it takes me a while to feel safe in most spaces, because I think that's in my personality and in the way how I grew up. And I think it's also part of my culture. We're not very like trusting people, so we need some time. So I definitely feel comfortable at work. I feel safe there with my teammates. I feel comfortable with my friends. I have to say, and this is also interesting when I reflected on that, that I feel more comfortable in Norway, for instance, in public spaces than in Croatia. Although Croatia is my country, but there's much more aggressiveness there, and I don't feel as safe many times. So yeah.
Thank you, Eva. Thanks for what will be the last word of the session today. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in on LinkedIn Live. I'd also like to say a huge thank you for all the fantastic questions and phenomenal engagement. In this session today, we've discussed why competencies in cross-cultural communication matter and how to do it like a pro. We've heard from 3 wonderful speakers who shared insights, lived experiences, thank you for that, and some really vivid stories take us on a journey of exploration, understanding, and enlightenment. And with increasing globalization of the economy, having a sound understanding of cross-cultural communication is, of course, a vital skill in today's workplace. I hope that you found some inspiration in the discussion today. This session of Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace was brought to you by Diversify. My name's Astrid Sundberg. It's been such a pleasure to have you with us. Please tune in to next month's session, which is going to be on toxic workplaces, leadership, and mental health. See you there.
I would also like to invite you to our Diversify Nordic Summit, which will be on the 27th of September in Oslo. I'm going to share the link.
I think
so
somebody
check it
did.
out. Sorry?
Somebody did, but yes, go on.
Okay, great. 2 times is better than none.
Absolutely. Thank you all. This has been really nice. Astrid, thanks for holding down the fort and for the questions. And Shahrzad, thank you for joining us. I really want to work at Expedia. I'm not sure how to do that now. It's like my own company, but yeah, it sounds like a dream workplace. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for having me. Really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Astrid, for moderating, and very lovely to meet you all.
Yeah, absolute pleasure to have you on the panel. Thanks, Shahrzad.
Thank you.